Well, you're in for a real treat. We're going to be discussing good energy with a new guest to the show, Dr. Casey Means, who is a courageous and brave physician who decided to escape 9 years of medical training, 5 years of an ENT residency because it didn't align with her beliefs of what health and being a physician should be. So she decided to leave and practice functional medicine, or what I call more accurately natural medicine. She's got unbelievable pedigree with respect to graduating #1 from Stanford Medical School and having done a lot of research in published journals, and really is very capable of articulating a strategy to help you understand the philosophical orientation that will be very helpful to you in making choices that will not only improve your mitochondrial energy, but give you an ability to connect to your own gut, your own intuition, so that you will know to be able to trust yourself and not the experts.
So many of those conditions that we call, comorbid, they kind of go together. That's our word in medicine for conditions that sometimes cluster together. They're all going up at the same time. We're on track this year to have more cancer cases than any year in human history. 2 million cancer cases in the US. Autoimmune diseases skyrocketing. Depression, anxiety skyrocketing. We have to outsource all of this to these huge, complex industries. Innovation is the answer. Don't trust yourself, trust the science. As we have trusted the science and not trusted ourselves, we've had an explosion of chronic disease rates in children, adults, and the elderly, and our life expectancy is going down, and we spend 2 times more than any other developed country in the world. Body is speaking to us every second. It speaks to us through symptoms, through our diseases, through our moods, through our interoception, sort of what's happening inside of us. It's constantly speaking to us. And the way I think about symptoms, as many, I think, people in more the functional space do, is that symptoms are a gift. Symptoms are the language through which our cells are trying to get our attention to tell us something very specific. Their needs are not getting met. And when we actually run through the checklist of the ways we can meet the needs of the cells, then oftentimes the symptoms melt away.
Welcome, everyone. Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today we're joined by a new guest who is an emerging star on the scene of health. And her name is Dr. Casey Means. She's got a very interesting story, highly pedigreed in somewhat ways, similar to Dr. Peter Attia. And I'll let you describe your pedigree because you're a Stanford grad. You did work at the NIH. And I think the biggest part of your pedigree is your brave and courageous decision that, to take 5 years of residency training, 5 years, folks. She went to medical school, Stanford. It was #1 in her class, right? I think you were. That's what you said in your book. #1 in your class is Stanford, which is one of the most prestigious medical schools in the US. And then she takes a 5-year ENT residency and literally months before she's going to finish, says, that's it. I'm out of here. That takes a lot of courage and bravery to do that. And so I really want to jump into your personal story because it's very intriguing, very powerful. And I think that's going to be perhaps an even more powerful message than some of the things you're recommending because you're leading by action. Yeah, and I think there's a big message there that an example that people can follow. So I would love for you to go into that because I first heard your interview and first heard of you through a mutual friend, Amy Stanton, and she sent me the interview you did with Andrew Huberman, who is another Stanford grad, of course.
Yeah. And
I wondered why the heck does an ENT doctor go into this type of medicine? It made no sense. But then I got your book and I read your dedication to your mom. And I'll let you share that story.
Yeah.
Because that's part of it.
Well, thank you. And yeah, so it was quite a hard right turn to go from belly of the beast, conventional healthcare system, climbing the ladder, doing what all doctors want to do, climb the ladder, specialize, specialize, specialize. That's what we celebrate. That is
Mhm.
what we celebrate in our system,
Mhm.
specialization.
Mhm.
It's so funny. I trained as an ENT head and neck surgeon, but what's even amusing to me is that to become even more, prestigious in the healthcare world, I could have even further specialized to just focus on either the ears, the nose, or the throat. You can become an otologist, a laryngologist, or a rhinologist, and that's, celebrated. And I think to really sum up the journey for me, it's that I had an awakening after, 9 years in the system, medical school residency, looking around me. You're so busy, as a surgical trainee. You're like a chicken with your head cut off, adrenaline all the time, operating, 10, 12 hours a day. And you can kind of miss some of the stuff that's going on around you because you're so busy. And I think in some
Mhm.
ways that's by design. But I kind of was able to pop up for a little bit and kind of look around me at like what's happening in America, what's happening more broadly in the country. And the reality is that people in America across the lifespan, kids, adults, the elderly, they're getting sicker every single year. Life expectancy is going down and healthcare costs are going up.
Mhm.
So the more we're spending, the more we're doing, the more we're specializing, the more research we're doing on minutia of this and that fitness protocol, the sicker and fatter we're getting. So there is some type of effort outcome mismatch in the American healthcare system that busting open more sinuses in the operating room is not really like chipping away at. And what's interesting and what I really notice is that so many of those conditions that we call, comorbid, they kind of go together. That's our word in medicine for conditions that sometimes cluster together. They're all going up at the same time.
Mhm.
We're on track this year to have more new cancer cases than any year in human history. 2 million cancer cases in the US. Autoimmune diseases skyrocketing, depression, anxiety skyrocketing, developmental disorders, behavioral issues in kids going up, infertility going up, type 2 diabetes going up, obesity going up, heart disease cases going up, heart disease deaths fortunately going down, but that's because of treatment. But it's this everything all at once situation, and we are somehow still buying into this idea that the more money we throw at the problem with the same approach that we've been doing, the better it's going to get. And that is totally false, because what the science is actually showing us, what the real biochemistry and cellular physiology research is showing us, is that all these conditions are connected. They're all connected by similar, invisible physiologic disturbances happening inside our cells. And we know this now. They're all fundamentally metabolic driven issues. And yet our healthcare system is not practicing metabolic medicine, because we're obsessed with silos and we're obsessed with specialization, because silos and specialization are profitable. If you can get one patient going to 10 specialists who can all bill for that patient, highly profitable. If you can get that one patient to go to a more metabolically focused root cause doctor, help them adjust some specific factors in their diet and lifestyle to really build mitochondrial capacity, a lot of their symptoms would probably diminish, and that would be very unprofitable. So there's a dark financial incentive, invisible hand, driving us to hyper specialize, to celebrate siloing, to actually become part of an obsessive cult of siloing. It's literally like it's a religion in our healthcare system, and in doing so, we're getting sicker. And so, really, the call to action of Good Energy, why I left the healthcare system after really meditating on a lot of these issues, is because what we really need is doctors waking up and having the courage to say, we're practicing medicine in an outdated way based on symptom-based criteria of diagnoses rather than true physiologic based of disease. And we need to modernize and update the healthcare system. And in that interim, while the healthcare system is essentially not catching up, we need to empower individuals to understand this aspect of their health, learn how to track it, learn how to improve it. And that's what this book is about.
Yeah. So again, you made a brave and courageous decision. You had a guaranteed significant six-figure salary right out of residency without even blinking, and yet you chose to abandon that after 9 years of training. Now, admittedly, only 5 of that was ENT
Right.
or residency, but it's a long time to revector. So I'm particularly intrigued with your journey, because this is not something we see commonly. It's relatively a relative anomaly, which is sad. But you had some epiphany, some turn of events in your life. And I know I've read enough of your book to know that you struggled with fear, a big portion, worry and anxiety. And so I'm really intrigued with the transition that occurred in your life, your personal journey, that allowed you to make this choice.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was really what I just described, was really so much like the more intellectual side of things, right?
Yeah.
It was like thinking about the issue.
Were you thinking about this through your training?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in part because of people like you and like other, people in the functional medicine space and the more root cause. I was reading a lot of these books. I mean, I would literally be on call in the hospital 30 hours and I'd be listening to audiobooks. Like, I remember reading Mark Hyman's The Ultramind Solution and like sort of these, Terry Walls, and I was reading some Sarah Gottfried, and I was reading Andrew Weil, and I followed your work. And I just, it was just planting these little seeds. I said, this is the medicine I came into medicine to practice, to empower people to generate health. And nothing I'm doing day in and day out is to empower people to generate their own health. I do value surgeons, and I think there is a need for surgeons. And this is not like surgery shouldn't exist, but there's no buts about it. Surgery is not a way to inspire the body to generate its own health. It's a way to essentially take out things that are rapidly offending the body, like a tumor, or kind of do plumbing, right? Like to change the anatomy of something to hopefully inspire less symptoms. But so that's sort of the intellectual journey. The personal journey that I think you're really speaking about is the second piece of the puzzle that really helped launch me into this world, which is that I had a much closer to home experience, not only with my own health, because my own health was basically trashed during residency when I was just working all the time and had to leave my surgical training to heal myself. But I had my mother, unfortunately, she represents essentially missing the warning signs of metabolic disease and treating patients in silos until they get the ultimate warning sign, which is a lethal diagnosis that takes their life prematurely. And that's what happened to my mom. She died far too young from pancreatic cancer, which is a cancer that's deeply tied to metabolic issues, and obesity and high blood sugar are driving factors of this cancer. And she, looking back at her life now from the vantage point where I stand, a vantage point that I did not learn at Stanford Medical School of root cause physiology, it is so clear to me the trajectory that she was going on that was totally missed by our system. So when she was 40, she had me, and I was a very large baby. I was like almost 12 pounds. She gained 75 pounds in pregnancy. And then she had a real difficulty losing the baby weight. So all those three things, big baby, weight loss resistance, and gaining a ton of weight during pregnancy, should have been screaming warning signs that she had insulin resistance, early metabolic disease. No one said anything. They congratulated her for having a big baby and told her that it was normal to keep on excess weight after pregnancy. Flash forward, 10 years. She has a really tough menopause, hot flashes, vasomotor symptoms, difficulty sleeping. Of course, her OBGYN says to her, menopause is so tough and there's basically like nothing we can do, so sorry. Of course, now we know metabolic issues and worse menopausal symptoms really in many ways go hand in hand. Flash forward 5-10 more years, she racks up all the American diagnoses. She gets the high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar. She's put on metformin, an ACE inhibitor, and a statin, rite of passage for the majority of Americans. And then, she's 72. She gets stomach pain. She gets a CT scan. She has stage 4 widely metastatic pancreatic cancer. And 13 days after that CT scan, she's dead. And at that time, my mom represents what so many American patients, I think, are going through, which is loyal to the healthcare system, faithful to it, doing all the things her doctors she was literally seeing doctors at like Palo Alto Medical Foundation and Mayo, like best doctors in the world, quote unquote, taking all the pills they prescribed, going to every single visit. She was doing these meal replacement programs, like Nutrisystem, and she was, working out with a trainer. She was doing everything they said, and her cells never actually healed, because even though she went through all the revolving doors, nothing was really focused on actually giving her body what it needed to generate mitochondrial and metabolic capacity, because we don't have that lens. And so when her doctors, and her oncologist was talking to us after this rapid decline, she looked at me and earnestly said to me, "I'm so sorry. This was so unlucky." And I just, looking back, I just laugh, because I'm like, the reality is through her lens, through the lens that we are taught in allopathic medical schools, of course it looked unlucky. Oh, big baby, bad menopause, high cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, cancer, all different silos, all different things, but through a different lens, the lens that we need to be practicing medicine with, which is one focused on what are the connections between these diseases. It would be so obvious that it was completely predictable. It wasn't unlucky. So the message I have to extrapolate from that for really everyone is that there's not necessarily going to be someone making the connections for you. So we need to each become familiar with the spectrum of metabolic related diseases and really gain that familiarity. And from that space, like I mentioned earlier, work to understand, track, and improve this core foundational part of our health, and put the pieces together, which the system right now is actively holding the pieces apart from us. So that's the personal side that just, really continued to evangelize me on this mission to practice a different type of medicine that I was taught.
So you've reached the conclusion, which is, I was really impressed with your presentation on with Andrew, that and you've mentioned it a few times here, it's metabolic and mitochondrial. So you understand, and I thoroughly agree with this, that the cause of essentially all and every disease is mitochondrial dysfunction. But that's conclusion is not common. It's a relative anomaly. So how did you reach that conclusion? Because people who do reach that path, and you reached it at an accelerated rate. You're going very fast. You're at a level now which is really kind of shocking, considering your amount of training. So how did you reach that level?
Honestly, it was interesting. A lot of it came, I think about this one patient that I had, who was a woman who came into the otology clinic with intractable migraines. And this was something that we would see. I mean, neurologists treat with migraines, primary care, but actually they do sometimes come into the ENT clinic, to the otology ear clinic, because you often want to rule out whether there's like an otologic sort of like tumor or something like that if they really are like resistant to treatment and all sorts of stuff. So I'm in my 5th year of surgical residency. I'm chief resident in otology. And this woman comes in, and she's got like the stack of paper, 5 inches thick, of all the other doctors she's seen. She's wearing sunglasses because she's so light sensitive. She has an emotional, like a support dog who helps her, like really debilitated. And we're the exact same age at this time. And, I'm like, what in God's name am I going to do for this woman? Truly. Like, I mean, respectable medicine, what I was expected to do and what respectable medicine would be to see her for 15 minutes, order a CT image, order imaging, MRI, to make sure there's no like, tumors of the, the nerves of, hearing or balance, and maybe prescribe a new medication for her to try for 6 weeks, send her out, schedule a 6-week follow-up, write the note, bill it, move on with my day. Make sure there's nothing life-threatening that we need to focus on, and then send her back to her neurologist and her primary care doctor. But I remember she also had inflammatory arthritis. She also had depression and anxiety. She was also overweight. She had all these other things going on. And I remember looking at her labs, and like her inflammatory markers were like off the charts. And I'm like, okay, well, she's got this arthritis, and, and I remember looking up I was just, so two things happened in that visit. The first is that I said to her, because I was always interested in nutrition, I love nutrition. I said to her, have you tried a migraine elimination diet or tried any of these supplements that actually do have a relationship with migraine, like some B vitamins and things like that? She's like, no, I haven't tried a diet and I haven't tried the supplements. Almost like if I were here, like sort of like the idea was like, I'm sure someone would have told me this. I've been on like 10 different medications. Like, I don't think diet is the answer. And I was like, well, it's probably worth a shot, like give it a try. So that was interesting to see, like, the basic stuff had just been ignored. And the second thing that was kind of interesting to me was in looking at her labs, I was like, her inflammation's off the charts. And I remember going to PubMed and Googling migraine and inflammation, because everyone says, oh, we don't really know why migraines, it's the pathophysiology is very complex and unclear. But I remember going to PubMed and being like, what's going on here? And it was just, there were dozens and dozens of paper about inflammation and migraine, oxidative stress and migraine. I'd never heard about oxidative stress before. I didn't know what that was. And then I was like, okay. And then there was like this relationship between oxidative stress and inflammation. I'm like, what is all this? Like, I don't really, and I love nutrition. And so I was like, and she was on a very processed diet. And so I was kind of just starting to put some pieces together. Like, she's eating all this processed junk. Her inflammatory markers are high. There's this whole new oxidative theory of migraine. There's this neuroenergetic theory of migraine. I've learned none of this. So I start digging down. And so then, I kind of went down that path for a lot of the conditions I was dealing with. I was like, what does PubMed say about what's like really going on underneath the sinusitis and the other diseases that I'm treating every day? And a lot of it I realized was that inflammation is sort of this like core thing that's happening in almost every condition that I was treating as an ENT. And you look at, what do ENTs treat? It's sinusitis, laryngitis, thyroiditis, cellulitis, otitis, parotitis, like everything's an itis. And itis is the suffix that means inflammation. So after a little bit of this digging on my own time, I was like, holy moly, I'm an inflammation doctor. And I didn't realize it. Like, I didn't understand that's what I'm actually fighting. And so, and that's what we prescribe. All we prescribe, we prescribe so much anti-inflammatory medication in ENT. It's nasal steroids. Steroids are, of course, medications that decrease immune activity. So it's nasal steroids, topical steroids, IV steroids, inhaled steroids, every type of steroid you could possibly imagine. We use it in ENT. So then I started asking, so some people might stop there and be like, okay, cool. We should think deeper about why all these patients have inflammation. Maybe it's the food. Maybe it's the toxins. Maybe it's something in the environment. But I think the next step was when I started going down the deep rabbit hole of what is causing the inflammation. This is where it led me to metabolic health, because it's not just the environmental factors that are leading the immune system to be upregulated. It's also the environmental factors that are crushing our cells' ability to power themselves properly. Metabolic health, metabolism, mitochondrial function. I realized, okay, a lot of the reasons why these toxins in our environment actually cause inflammation is because they crush our mitochondrial health. Yeah. They create underpowered cells. And then our body sees these underpowered, distressed cells, metabolically dysfunctional cells, and that creates a huge inflammatory reaction. But this is the craziest part about chronic inflammation to me, is that you've got these cells that, because of processed food and because of the toxins, because of our sedentary lifestyle, our mitochondria are being hurt, our cells are underpowered, the immune system's revved up, but the immune system can never settle down because the mitochondrial function will never get fixed until the environment gets cleaned up. So it's like the immune system is impotent in its effort to fix mitochondrial dysfunction because the problem is outside of the body. So that was the like sequence of events for me of basically waking up to the fact that I was an inflammation doctor, realizing that I had no clue what causes inflammation, going down that road, and then realizing it's not just about the inflammation. There's a deeper layer, which is a petrified, distressed set of cells that can't power themselves because of metabolic dysfunction, that's leading to this big inflammatory response in the body that will never settle down until the environment gets cleaned up. So ultimately I started looking at sinusitis as like, well, one other conclusion sort of came about that I think really hit me so much to my core, which is that inflammation is essentially, it's like the body's army, and most Americans are chronically inflamed now because of our toxic environment. And inflammation is fundamentally biochemical fear. It's essentially the body being afraid of something. And I'm like, wow, we're all walking around with invisible fear circulating through our bodies. And the way that looks is all this disease and mental health issues that we have. But it's actually a very basic biochemical problem. And if we can approach the body with that sense of compassion, like how do we create a less threatening environment for this precious body that's just trying to help us have a happy life? How can we actually start pulling away the things that are causing fear to our cells, hurting the mitochondria, and give the body the things that will give it the capacity and resilience to feel safe?
Yeah, that's great. I definitely want to explore your last chapter, which is fearlessness. It's a big passion of mine too. And as you were sharing your story, it was very clear to me that as you were mentioning inflammation, that's just merely a symptom. That's not the cause. That's just a symptom, as you accurately identified. And I commend you on your concise appreciation, understanding of the problem. You did it very succinct and accurate. I think the key is accurate summary of what the problem is. And not many people reach that conclusion. So I'm still curious. You're such a recent grad. You're 6 years out of your training, for the most part. I think there's a timing.
About that, yeah.
Yeah. So
well, actually, and also I should mention, I totally quit my residency in the last year.
I know.
I pieced out because once I figured this out, I was like, this is all effed. Like I gotta get, like everyone's like, you should finish. You only have 6 more months. And I'm like, I can't finish. Yeah. I fundamentally don't agree with what we're doing here. And when you get to that conclusion, try going into the operating room and cutting a patient open. I literally couldn't do it because I was
you had integrity.
Yeah. So
many people do not make that choice, I can assure you. And I'm sure you've seen it.
It's funny. I have seen a lot of people ignore thinking about this.
Right.
A lot of the people that I know who have gone down this journey have left. Mm-hmm. And I think, but I would say the vast majority choose to just not engage with this.
And I don't criticize them because they have many obligations and responsibilities and commitments that they have to honor. They're married, they have kids, they have loans to pay back. So there's a lot of good justification one can make not to make that choice.
Yes and no. I think we are dealing with just an absolute crisis of lack of courage right now in our country. Like it's not there. I think it's a fallacy that there's not opportunity on the other side. I know I'm not saying you're disagreeing with this, but I do understand the obligations, but I also think this comes down to the fear question. We are trapped inside a system that makes us think that we are so small and dependent. And we, as you know, we indoctrinate doctors to actually feel very helpless, and to not ask questions and to be very militaristic. And, I would really like, I'm not antagonistic towards doctors, but I really want doctors to understand, if there are people listening who are still in the system, that like the system has made us think that like, if you put down your scalpel or get out of conventional practice, you're never coming back and you're kind of going to be screwed. But there's nothing further from the truth. I think anyone who follows the call towards a different way finds amazing opportunity on the other side. And, life is really short. So I think following those calls, from the universe towards what you feel like is more the light that you should be doing, nothing could be a better choice, I think.
No, I couldn't agree more. I'm completely.
But I do have compassion too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to have real-time forgiveness for those who make that choice.
Yes.
Because they're not at the same place. And ultimately, it would benefit them, because I think that the implied message here is that they're not making choices. And I think this is the core. And I would offer this as for your consideration, to helping people make choices that move them in the direction of generating more cellular energy, would be to monitor a very simple test that you don't have to go to the doctor to get. It's available to each and every one of us. We know what it is, and that's to measure the amount of joy you have.
Preach. I say that. I love that. I love you for saying that. I always say this. I said, like, the ultimate biomarker, we don't need to do anything.
Right.
If you want instant biofeedback on whether your diet and lifestyle and sleep and supplements are working, what is your level of waking up with a sense of optimism, joy, and total awe at this precious miracle of life? And that's not going to be every single day, right? But like on a general level, is that sense of, just real cosmic sort of unflappable joy there, And I think when we're doing all the things we know that create metabolic health, getting in the sunshine, walking, moving, eating, managing our emotional health, cultivating fearlessness, avoiding toxins, that kind of is something that is emergent from that way of living more in touch with nature and not in antagonism with nature.
So it sounds, and I don't know, I mean, it sounds like that wasn't your experience up until maybe 6-7 years ago, because at least what I've read in your book, there was a lot of fear and anxiety going on there throughout large portion of your life. Is that accurate? I'm just okay. So I want to understand it, because I only have a superficial understanding of your story.
So this is what happened, is that I have been always just like a completely exuberant, like happy, joyful person.
Okay.
But when I got into the depths of the healthcare system, and
that's what caused it.
Okay. I developed, and
that's where the fear, and the sleepless and the wakeless nights. Okay.
Oh yeah, and I got sick. I became the patient as I was advancing in my healthcare career, and I saw it happening to a lot of my friends. And what was so interesting is that once I became a second-year surgical resident, working around the clock and all the sleepless nights and cafeteria food and not exercising and never seeing sunlight and all the artificial light, et cetera, I got depression and anxiety and acne all over my face and chronic neck pain and IBS. And I didn't make a solid stool for 2 years. And I got, that was the main stuff. It was IBS and depression and acne and chronic pain. And I was like, I went to all the doctors, because they have the resident health services and everything. And they're like, oh, a loperamide for the gut. Here's an antidepressant. Oh, here's doxycycline for your skin. Here's some Flexeril for your neck. And I'm like, I didn't take any of it, because on some level I knew, like, my life is completely out of control right now with surgical residency. And like, I wasn't like this a year ago. So this is ridiculous that this would be the approach. Like, so what I actually did was take 3 months off of residency. And of course, in 6 weeks, just eating healthy and being outdoors and taking hikes and talking to my family more and connecting with friends, everything went away. Of course, because my cells were getting what they needed. And so that was that experience for me. And I remember telling my parents, I feel like every conversation with them that year, I was just crying, and I said, you guys, like, what I felt was like, I have started living in black and white. Like, I am living in black and white, and I forget what it's like to think in color. And I couldn't synthesize. I was always a writer and creative. I couldn't take different concepts and like put them together in a creative way. And it was devastating to me, because I'm like, I'm losing myself. And looking back now and actually understanding the metabolic root of mental illness. And Chris Palmer is so amazing with Brain Energy, writing his book about how he's a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, and he believes that every mental health issue is fundamentally a mitochondrial disorder. I think back, I was like, every element of my life that year was crushing my mitochondrial health. And if you think about mitochondria as both the motherboard of the cell, but also the powerhouse of the cell, of course I was thinking in black and white. My brain cells, my body, my gut didn't have enough energy. My muscles didn't have enough energy. My brain didn't have enough energy. My skin cells, everything was broken. And that was just emerging as a bunch of different symptoms. And so once I got that metabolic function back on track with those simple strategies to support my mitochondrial health, of course, the color went back on, because I had the power, the light within, to
Mhm.
create the color. So I just have so much compassion for people dealing and with mental health issues, which are of course going up every year in our country, because there's something that we can actually do to support that. That's, there's so many modalities to address mental health issues, but one of the ones that is very actionable is focusing on building our capacity to power our brain
But
cells.
it's really easy with mental health because the brain is 2% of the body weight by volume, and yeah, it consumes 20% of the energy.
Yeah.
So it's no mystery that if you're not creating enough cellular energy, you are not going to be able to power your brain. It's just not
Yes.
physically possible.
Yes.
It can't happen. It doesn't. It's
No.
not physics. It doesn't
And
add up.
and then on top of the mental health issues, there's the general, speaking neurologically, like, it's like one of the most common complaints in the PCP's primary care doctor office is just vague feelings of fatigue. We're just, I mean, it's energy. We're just tired. So it's, we talk about metabolic health. A lot of people think like, oh, is this about like our physical energy? And it's like, yeah, for sure. But it's also so much more than that. But even, I mean, I think so many people I know are just so tired, and just so fatigued. And so, but when you think about how much energy our neurologic system uses, like you just said, it makes so much sense.
Yeah, certainly
Yeah.
for the mental and psychiatric issues. Uh, so there's so many different routes we can go down, but I'm curious as to how did you gain this knowledge? I mean, it sounds like you've had a lifelong passion for this, and you went into medicine for the right reasons. And many people don't, but they claim they did. So it's a little bit less challenging to make these types of choices. But how did you acquire your training and understanding of what to do? Because I was really impressed with your book and how you, in a relatively short period of time, consolidated many excellent recommendations. And not all of them I agree with, of course, because I've been doing this a little longer than you. But everything you've said so far, I'm on 100% agreement with. It's so spot on and elegant and masterfully stated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of acquiring information, that's such an interesting question, and I love that question. The first thing that comes to mind when you ask me that is it all, so much in life comes down to incentives, right?
Mhm.
And I think one of the big reasons why we're getting sicker every year as Americans is because the incentives are wrong in the healthcare
Mhm.
system. We
Mhm.
actually, the financial incentive of our system is that if we have more sick patients in the system for a longer period of time, having more things done to them, we make more money. That's a bad incentive, right?
Mhm.
That's going to trickle down into how we do research, how we practice, how guidelines are written, how we see patients, all towards actually promoting a system in which they're in it for longer, i.e., not healing. But then I think about my incentives of actually my family
Mhm.
and the incentives my parents put
Mhm.
into the fabric of our family life. And what I always think, I write my dad about this all the time. I'm just like, thank you for doing this, because the incentives in our family was not achievement, and it was not like accolades or standard metrics of success. The only incentive in our family were acting with integrity and asking tough questions and thinking for yourself. So when my brother or I would ask hard questions or think differently or think freely or express a nonconformist viewpoint and act in society with integrity, we were celebrated. And so that's very different than a lot of
Positively
children.
reinforced.
Positively reinforced. So then what do you create? You create a human who it's
Mhm.
wired within their nervous system to look for ways behind closed doors and in public to do what they believe is right, and that like support and tribe will support you even if that's a tough choice, and same with asking questions. So for me, this built-in incentive, and the same as for my brother who's the co-author on my book and who has also led a very non-traditional career path. How do you just basically, if you sniff something that doesn't make sense or doesn't quite seem right, how do you basically chase that like a rabid dog who like needs to kind of get to the bottom of whatever it is? And that's sort of in terms of acquiring, digging for a lot of these answers and really not stopping until I felt like I had a unifying theory for all of it. That's sort of what drove it. And in that same vein, I'm just like, I'm sure my thoughts will evolve even more, because there's always new
With the
things
problem, right?
happening. Yeah.
So you revealed the answer to my question, which is that it was your parents
Yeah.
who loved you.
Yeah. Yeah. And people say, "Oh my God, what did your parents do when you quit residency?" I said they celebrated.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
celebrated.
That's
And
the
I
response you
mean
expect.
that.
Yeah.
Because my dad's an economist, he understands like all the craziness of the health,
Mm-hmm.
and they are such learners and
Mm-hmm.
such curious intellectuals that they were coming along this journey with me
Mm-hmm.
and excited to, understand. And it's just so cool to see my dad, he's written 5 books, had a huge career, and he's 76, and he's become a complete, functional medicine, advocate. He's reversed all his health conditions. He grows his own food. So just to see someone in older, not and he could not be more vibrant. And it's like, so they modeled it, they incentivized it, and celebrated essentially doing the things that didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. But and then also kind of gave me that sense of, if you follow the light or the signals that the universe is putting in front of you, if you ignore them, life will be hard. If you follow them, things just will work out, and you just got to trust that. Like, you just it might not make sense, but I think that the most disastrous thing you can do in this lifetime is hear calls and signals and ignore them. And that's my view. And I know that
boy,
you
I'm telling
know,
you, that's like the one of the wisest things you said so far. It's
thank you.
absolute truth. Absolute truth. If more
Yeah.
people understood that, the world would be more full of joy.
Yeah. That's why the last chapter of my book is called Fearlessness.
I know. That's what was my favorite chapter.
Yeah. So, but you have to believe that before taking those leaps, and then have these iteration cycles to know this keeps working out, and so, leaving the relationship, leaving the job, moving to the new city, questioning authority, whatever it is. And so, and it's funny, even saying that, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is to sort of caveat that with saying, well, I know I do have a luxury of doing that because I'm very privileged, and I'm, I'm a white, well-educated female.
You would make the same choice even if you weren't. 100%. No doubt in my mind.
Maybe, but I think there is an interesting force. There's a force in our culture that actually, I think, what I'm saying, and what I know you agree with, because you're saying that resonates with you too. There's this sort of dark force in our modern culture that actually tries to make what I'm saying, and I think what you agree with, to be made out to be some sort of elitist way of living. Like, you're not in touch with the realities of the world, and you're kind of following your calling, and that's it's almost like this sort of way of being that's like, well, good for you, you can do that. And I don't know I think there's so, because I think when you can make out that type of what I'm saying and what we're talking about to be wrong in some way, like, be practical, we have to be, what it does is it convinces people even more so to not take that leap. And I think more of us need to be taking that leap, and so
the extension of what you're saying and expressing it in different words, and you do say it in the book, is to trust yourself.
Yes.
Not the experts. Not the experts.
Yeah.
So can you expand on that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So one of the chapters in the book is called Trust Yourself, Not Your Doctor, which is a strong statement. And I want to be very clear, because I think people will misinterpret this, and they will say, we've produced miracles in medicine, and this is going to get people to not do their chemotherapy that they need to do. And none of it's about that.
That might be a good thing. That might be a good thing.
Maybe in some cases, but none of it is about.
Maybe in most cases.
But the real point I'm making,
I will not take a cancer patient if they choose to take chemo.
Wow.
100%. And I've got an approach that will cure well over 95% of cancer patients, assuming they don't take chemo rather.
Wow.
In 1995, I made a similar brave choice like you did.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of patients. it was a minor local practice, and I had this epiphany like you did in your practice. I said, listen, this medical model doesn't work. If you're on drugs, if you're taking drugs, and you're not interested in engaging in a path to get yourself off of them, you need to find a new doctor. 80% of my patients left. 80%.
Yeah. Because that's hard.
Yeah.
It's not trusting yourself, right? It's like, yeah. Oh, man. And then the 20% who did obviously grew into a much bigger.
Yeah. And then almost everyone got better. And that word of mouth spread like crazy. And then my practice blew up. It's again, trusting yourself. But I want you to expand on this because it's such a brilliant chapter. Trust yourself. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Are you kidding? I want to hear you talk. This is amazing. I also want to circle back to the parts of the book that you didn't agree with, because I would love to learn more about that. But so the trust yourself, not your doctor is fundamentally about a trend that is very, very pervasive in our world right now, which is the subtext that drives our $4 trillion failing healthcare system, which is this idea that health is too complex and disease is too complex for us to understand it for ourselves. We have to outsource all of this to these huge, complex industries. Innovation is the answer, and don't trust yourself. Trust the science. Trust the science.
Yeah.
Like you've got it on billboards. Yeah. Trust the science. What is the subtext of trust the science? It's don't trust yourself. And yet you sit back, and as we have trusted the science and not trusted ourselves, we've had an explosion of chronic disease rates in children, adults, and the elderly, and our life expectancy is going down, and we spend 2 times more than any other developed country in the world. So you look at it, the wild, you look at it, animals, and they don't have PubMed, they don't have experts, they don't have the USDA, they don't have the FDA, they don't have the NIH, and there's no obese, chronically ill, there's not a single animal species that we know of in the world that has a chronic disease and obesity epidemic.
I would disagree with that.
Okay, give it to me.
Domestic pets.
That is, I talk about it in the book. Those are not wild animals. They're not wild animals.
I get that, but
in the wild. And we talk about domestic dogs. That is the perfect example. Wild dogs and wolves, virtually no cancer. Domestic dogs, 50% get cancer. There are dogs wearing continuous glucose monitors for their type 2 diabetes, getting insulin shots. We have essentially, so you've got these animals who somehow have figured out a way to trust themselves and their intuition, and we are told to trust the science, and we're sick as hell. So that's just, and then you go to, okay, that's the dark side. What about the hopeful side? Well, we're at a time in human history where we actually could, I think, have some of the longest and happiest lives in human history.
100%.
But we could. It's a beautiful time. Mm-hmm. And I think 2 things that we can do to empower ourselves to really be able to trust ourselves more. One is analog and one is sort of more modern. So the analog one that I think we often just forget is to listen to what your body's telling you all the time. Because, body is speaking to us every second. It speaks to us through symptoms, through our diseases, through our moods, through our interoception, sort of what's happening inside of us. It's constantly speaking to us. And the way I think about symptoms, as many, I think, people in more the functional space do, is that symptoms are a gift. Symptoms are the language through which our cells are trying to get our attention to tell us something very specific. Their needs are not getting met. And when we actually run through the checklist of the ways we can meet the needs of the cells, then oftentimes the symptoms melt away. In our culture, similar to the trust the science, what do we think about symptoms in our modern Western culture? We think they're intolerable, and the only job we have for symptoms is to squash them. So you walk into CVS, you walk into Walgreens, we all take this as normal. But think about this. You walk down the aisle and each section is labeled by a different symptom, of which there are then 80 colorful packages with the express purpose of smashing the symptom. So it's like, okay, here's the sinus, here's the cough and flu, here's the headache, here's the rashes, here's this and that, here's the gastric reflux section. Instead of what we could do is with compassion and curiosity, think for 2 seconds, what is my body trying to tell me about how its needs are not getting met? And like a parent would do with an infant that's crying, figure out, brainstorm about how to meet those needs. So that's the analog of like how we can trust ourselves, is to slow down, extricate a little bit from the busyness industrial complex of our world that wants us to just be like little obsessively moving worker bees, and listen to our bodies. And then number 2 is leverage the incredible technology that exists today to see inside our bodies in a different way through our lab tests, our biomarkers, our wearables, even things like biosensors that we have now, like continuous glucose monitors. So actually learn the basics of the 10 to 15 key basic biomarkers that together can help you read the tea leaves of what's going on inside your body and your cells, track them every 3 to 4 months, and be able to get out of the diet wars and the strong, but maybe, unfortunately, maybe not super helpful advice from your conventional doctor, and just cut through all of that and, double down on a set of dietary and lifestyle interventions, get baseline tests, and check them 3 to 4 months later. And if they're moving in the right direction towards the optimal range and your symptoms are getting better, then you're probably taking a good approach. So there's these ways we can feel confidence in that we're moving in the right direction and get less confused in all the noise. And in many ways, the system disincentivizes us from doing both of those things, from trusting what our bodies are telling us and from understanding our biomarkers. In over 22 American states, patients don't even own their healthcare records. The hospital system does, or the doctor does. So there's literally entrenched mechanisms to get you to not even see your biomarkers. So that's kind of the way out I see, is body awareness and some, testing and taking real ownership for understanding a little bit about our physiology and biology over time.
Yeah, I agree. There are some challenges to implementing that, and I'm hoping you can offer some suggestions on how to navigate that. And there's a fine balance between trusting yourself and trusting experts, because at some point if you're going to trust yourself, you're going to need to make another choice. And I think that's probably a key too, is to be out of fear enough so that you can be confident to make a choice. Because it doesn't matter if you're wrong or right. If you use your joy, you can figure it out. It was wrong or right. And then you pivot and make another choice. They keep on making those choices. But the problem is people get stuck so frequently, and they stop and they don't make a choice and they stay where they're at. And that's the kiss of death. Mm-hmm. So the challenge is because not all experts, most of them are not going to give you accurate information, but how do you navigate that? How do you select that first? Because there is value, as you did. You found experts, people who knew more than you, that guided you along this path. But not everyone's able to do that. And you had training. They don't have training. They didn't go to 9 years of medical training. You did. So you had an unfair advantage. The patient doesn't have that skill set to go to PubMed, to interpret the data, to make a better choice. So it's much, much harder for someone in those circumstances. And that's the challenge. And it's something I pondered about. I don't really believe I have an answer. That's why I'm curious, because you're brilliant, actually, and you have a very good command of the language. I'm wondering how you respond to that.
You. Oh, I mean, I think this is one where I feel like there are certain factors in life that I think give you such a leg up on having the ability to kind of make different choices. And for me, like I mentioned earlier, it's having an extremely supportive and loving family.
Yeah.
That is huge. I mean, because in some of those call room heart-to-hearts with some of my co-residents who desperately wanted to leave, it was almost impossible. It felt impossible because of the expectations and the responsibility. A lot of them were financially supporting their families in right. some capacity. And it's a lot. And I just have so much respect for that, those challenges, and I think, but I do I do think that there are actual structured ways that we
Mhm.
can cultivate a sense of fearlessness in making unconventional choices and thought patterns. And I outline those in chapter 9 of the book because it's a question that people say, like, I would love to do what you're doing, but I don't know how. And I think the honest truth is that it's a lifetime of cobbling together different modalities, strategies, and intellectual pursuits and experiential pursuits that all together create an ecosystem in your life that is, I think, just impervious to like the winds of culture that kind of want to like dominate you and blow you over. So what do I mean by that? That's kind of vague, but like I think it's fundamentally, I think it comes down to addressing the things that are driving your behavior in a conformist direction, which is usually fear. And I
Mhm.
think when I really break down fear and fear as a limiting emotion, very much a limiting emotion and a controlling emotion, I think that there's several different main categories of fear that most of us are dealing with, each of which has to be pursued ruthlessly as our number one priority in life to basically address it, think about it, and try to, in many ways, manage and overcome it so that we can have freedom. Because fear is the opposite of freedom. And so the ones that I think are kind of big bucket categories is, I'll mention three. One, I think, is sort of all those sort of childhood wounds that develop, which I kind of feeds into intergenerational stuff because it's often stuff that came through your parents and put on you that create neurologic realities in your brain, patterns of emotion and wiring that create a potentially lifetime of hypervigilance and limiting thought patterns that make you think it's fearful to do something that's going to in some way hurt the wound that was developed earlier in you. So basically, category one, childhood, big T, little t trauma, huge trigger of lifelong low grade or high grade built-in fear, the way you look at the world. Two is the fear that's coming through our devices 24 hours a day, 7 days a week because of the sensationalist media industry that is the entire business model of modern media is attention and buying your attention, and humans are wired to pay attention to threatening things. And so our phones now have become a terrorist, device that basically like are going to be streaming the fears and troubles of 8 billion people straight to your eyeballs at the dinner table, in bed, when you're at the park with your kids, all the time, making us think that it's a deeply unsafe world when it's actually one of the safest times in human history to be alive. So two is devices and targeted, essentially digital terrorism through our media into your eyeballs, which essentially creates a sense of fear every day, all day, that all of our cells are experiencing constantly, thinking that we're in like a mass homicidal world all the time. And then the third is probably the biggest one, which is just like fear of mortality. In the
Mhm.
Western world, we are so uncurious about death. We're petrified about death. We don't engage with death. We don't talk about death. So many other cultures in the world, indigenous, Eastern, Stoics, so many other cultures obsessively thought about death and what it means and what it is and how it's a part of a bigger pattern. And we just don't talk about it. And our entire healthcare system is literally built to keep us afraid of death so that we will do anything, buy anything, take any pill, do any surgery to possibly push away death. So it's a grip they have on us. So a challenge I have for people to get back to your question of how to make harder decisions is address every potential avenue of fear that is controlling your mind, your life, and your behavior, and go to the ends of the earth to figure it out, understand it, manage it. And that can be done through a lot of different ways, and I talk about all of them in the book. It's, some of them, like, it's therapy and counseling, some of it's journaling, some of it's reading ancient text to give you perspective. Read the Rumi, read the Hafiz, read the poetry, read the Mary Oliver, read the Lao Tzu, read the Du Fu, read it. They thought about it so much. We can learn from them. Read the philosophical, work that helps us manage fear. Go into nature, deeply soothing, gives us a sense of the bigger picture. The average American spending 93% of our time indoors. This makes us petrified. We have to go outside to see the patterns of nature to realize the world is abundant and there's actually nothing really to fear. We're in an eternal, infinite, expanding universe. We all need to, calm down. And, so I talked about writing, I talked about reading texts, going outside, reading ancient texts, going outside. There's even, and I talk a little bit about like, there's other modalities that are more dramatic, like psychedelics, like which when done in a very responsible way can potentially help accelerate the journey towards seeing a bigger picture. There's breath work. There's all sorts of different things that we can do to manage our relationship with fear that controls all of our behavior. And I think that is our number one job as humans. Ultimately, I think where it will lead you is to realizing that the world and the universe is fundamentally good. It's fundamentally connected. It's fundamentally one of light. And we can and should live fully and express fully and live fearlessly. And the way this gets back to metabolism in a funny way is that, metabolism is how we create energy in our cells, but fundamentally it's how we transform energy from outside of us in food to our inside of us to a currency of energy that powers our lives. And so in a bigger sense, metabolism also relates to all of this because really good metabolism is the flow of cosmic energy that started in the sun, was stored in the carbon-carbon bonds of plants, channeling through our bodies to power this process that we are. And so when we're fearful and we are making decisions out of fear, which often are unhealthy decisions, which break our metabolism, it actually stops us from doing the most miraculous thing about our body, which is transforming sunlight to human energy. So we have to go down that journey. That's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's truly the most important part of health, because without really going down that deeper pathway and work, I think it's very hard to really understand why we're making some of these hard health choices. But it's all connected, and I think when we can feel really liberated and powerful in this miraculous nature of our body, overcome some of these culturally entrenched chronic fear signals, our bodies can just do their absolute best work, and we can make the hard decisions that sometimes seem scary.
Yeah. So very good and long answer. Thank you for
Sorry,
sharing.
yeah. I just,
Yeah, it was good. You're obviously passionate about this. It seemed one of the common themes in the strategies you had recommended was that to get your mind out of the picture. And my view of fear is that it's a thought. The thought is in your mind. It's nowhere else. It doesn't exist anywhere but in a thought. And if you can get out of your mind, so some of the strategies, as you mentioned, will help you do that. Even psychedelics, which I don't recommend because I think there's better strategies, better strategies than that are just as effective, if not more effective. And you don't have to resort to it. Not to say it doesn't work, it can, but I think it has potential complications. So but that is the core of everything. And, it's the foundation of health, what you're describing. Because it doesn't matter the specifics, and as I said, I disagree with some of your choices, but those are almost irrelevant, because if you don't have the mindset, if you don't have the knowledge and the philosophy to engage in the process in a healthy way, you'll never get it. I don't care what information you get. You have to have the philosophy, and you're in some ways you're a philosopher. That's at least what you said. That you're a medical doctor, but you're more of a philosopher to help people make choices to get joy in their life.
Oh, yeah, I think everything you say is exactly, it resonates so much to me. Like it's we've got to get out of the thought patterns that are the root cause of why we're making the choices that make us sick. And that's a whole different journey that we just don't talk about. And everything will, I think we can muscle our way through
Mhm.
hard lifestyle choices, and we can kind of muscle our
Mhm,
way
mhm,
through like, oh, I'm going to eat real food. But I think when you go to that level that you're talking about, that I'm talking about,
mhm,
it becomes actually like it has to be that way. Like, of course, when I really transcend essentially ego and this
mhm,
sense of separation from
mhm,
everything and realize, start to tap into more of, I think, some of the fundamental truths of this beautiful thing we're doing here as conscious beings, um and realize that you're so deeply connected to everything around you,
mhm,
like, um then it just becomes like, and really committing to this idea, like, I want to be a transformer of cosmic energy. Like,
mhm,
that is, to me, that is my birthright. Like, that is what I'm here to do, is to
mhm.
create capacity in this form of quote unquote Casey, to transform energy in a way that feels like most pure and beautiful to me. I don't know what really all that means, but I know that's what I'm in part here to do. And so, of course, I'm going to buy food from the farmer's market that's not sprayed with poison, because I have a job here.
Mhm.
I have a job to build some cells that can do what they were miraculously self-assembled in my mother's belly to do. You know, it's
Mhm.
just like, it's, and so it doesn't become, people say, how do you eat like this? How do you find the time to cook all these foods from scratch and buy food from the farmer's market? And it's because once you go down this road, I think there's no other way. Of course, I'm going to go outside and bask in the sun, because it's my life source, you know? And so that's, I think that's why it's so important. It actually makes the journey more effortless in a
Yeah,
way, because it becomes more of a spiritual journey.
it is. Fundamentally, it is a spiritual journey. There's no question. That's the fundamental truth.
Yeah.
So, and very few people understand that. You're one of the few people I know who understands it, at
Mm,
least from a medical professional perspective.
thank you.
And what you wisely put together is that unless you're able to fuel your biology with the right fuel, and have so that it can produce the maximum amount of energy to repair and regenerate every cell in your body, because that's what it was designed to do. Unless you do that, you're not going to have the energy to connect energetically to your spirit. You just won't. It's not there. You can't maximally achieve that. It's not possible, folks. You need to have energy to do that. That's why your work, your understanding, your commitment to do this is so profoundly important.
Mm. And that's in one way why I worry about some of the cultural, not worry about, but like why I notice what's happening in our culture in a way,
Mhm,
along with this whole chronic disease explosion and the
mhm,
disempowerment of people in their personal health journeys, and all of this, you know, trillions of dollars of the healthcare, pharma, industrial agriculture, processed food nexus, you know, all of it. On top of that, we're also seeing these societal trends of really like diminishing
mhm,
spirituality and
mhm,
despiritualizing. Like, you know, there's a lot of, and I think in some ways social media propagates this, of just sort of a very, well, of course it propagates fear, but on the flip side, kind of, I don't know, almost, I see a lot of forces that are kind of against, you know, strong family, you know, like, oh, you know, sort of the culture of sort of like, oh, you know, go have your fun, and, you know, the
pleasure.
sort of sequelae pleasure and the
Pleasure
sequelae.
instead of joy.
I,
Big difference.
as a 36-year-old woman, I see this a little bit in like the sort of some of the downstream effect of the feminist movement, you know, which has so many positives, but there's also this subtext of like hustle, 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 work, 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 work. Don't prioritize having kids or having a family. Don't prioritize like spirituality and faith. Prioritize climbing the corporate ladder. And I've had to really unlearn a lot of that to get to a lot of where I'm, where I am now. But the culture on, I think we just all, I'm only saying that because I think we all need to be aware of a very complex matrix that we're inside of, which essentially right now, so many powerful components of it that we consider quote unquote normal are actually creating forces that despiritualize us and then make us feel disempowered, and then just drive us to do things that hurt our capacity to create energy in our bodies. So what do you get from that? You get a population of humans on the planet that have a dimmed life force, that are weaker, and that are very controllable, and that are very profitable. And so I think it's an act of resistance in a lot of ways to meditate on spirituality,
Mhm.
to focus on slowing down and deep, deep, meaningful relationships. And then, of course, to do the things that are just, slower and more about connection. Because those are the things that are, connection with the earth, connection with the sun,
Right.
connection with our bodies. They're all going to help us generate cellular energy through complex biology, but they all feed back into a body that has more capacity.
Yeah.
And that is the strongest force.
Yeah.
That's a powerful force.
Because ultimately they decrease cortisol, which,
Yes.
which is the big issue. And we can talk about the cortisol some
Yes.
maybe in a bit. We'll just finish this up first. With respect to where was I going with that? This was fleeting thought. Okay, it was really good too. Darn.
No. Oh, was it? Let's see. Oh, spirituality.
Yeah. It all was that down to that anyway. It just left. It'll come back probably.
It'll come back.
But I do want to talk a little bit about some of the biology.
Yeah.
Because it's important, and we're both medical doctors, so so we have some knowledge in this area that can be some insights. And I think, one of the mistakes I made, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've confused the not the victim, but the uh, the marker for the problem. So there's this common recognition in most medical professionals that glucose is the problem and insulin resistance. And but just like the inflammation, they're the symptoms, they're not the cause. So there's, and so it seems so obvious to me, for the first 20, 30 years of my clinical approach was that, get people on low carb diets. That makes the most sense. And what I've learned is that probably isn't a wise strategy. And I haven't read enough of your book because I just got it a few days ago. I read portions of it, but I didn't read the whole thing. So I'm just wondering what your approach is on carbohydrates, because it does have a really significant impact on the amount of energy you're able to generate, especially at the mitochondrial level. And we can go really complex and deep if we need to, but we don't have the time to do that. But we could if we needed to.
Yeah.
So do you have a position on that?
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I mean, the premise of the book really is exactly what you said, which is that glucose and the insulin are not the problem.
Yeah.
They are, of course, a problem. They become the problem.
They're important markers.
They become the problem.
Right.
But the problem's inside the cell. The problem's not the glucose and insulin floating around. That is a adaptation to a couple of processes inside the cell that we know really are mostly generated by our environment, by our toxic environment and environmental mismatch. And the two that are inside the cell that I talk about in the book, I call it the trifecta of bad energy, the trifecta of metabolic dysfunction, which is oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, and resultant chronic inflammation. And actually, I shouldn't say resultant because they're actually all bidirectional arrows. They all can lead to each other in bidirectional ways. And when those things are happening, there's actually intermediate steps, even before the glucose and insulin rise, of like toxic intracellular fat accumulation that blocks, the signaling of insulin inside the cell. And then ultimately what happens is we reject glucose from the cell because of insulin resistance. And that's multiple steps down the process, which is why once glucose has risen in the bloodstream, we are very far down the road of a problem. And which is one of the reasons why I love testing fasting insulin, because that's earlier. But what I wish we could really test is like true mitochondrial function and oxidative stress, which in some ways we can get a little sense of it. And because that's more at the heart of the problem, I think.
I'm developing a mitochondrial lab to do this, that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's so necessary because
you're right. That's the core. And we're using a seahorse assay and 3 redox pairs to do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the future. Because then when we have the migraine and the heart disease and the erectile dysfunction and infertility and the fatty liver disease and the retinopathy, we could test those things and tell people, are your strategies actually ameliorating the things that are causing all these issues that are like 10 layers up from the intracellular process? And so to go back to carbohydrates, I think my stance, I wish I could have a super simple answer for you, but I think there's two
Okay.
things I feel strongly about with carbohydrates. One is that ultra processed refined carbohydrates, either ultra processed sugar or ultra
Process
processed
anything.
carbohydrates,
Yeah.
should never be eaten by humans
Yeah.
ever, or dogs or anything. We shouldn't be eating any ultra processed food. Ultra processed food is an experiment that has failed, and we need to put it in the annals of history and move on. And the reason is because anything that's ultra processed is going to lead to essentially chronic overnutrition because the body doesn't know how to handle it. It's depleted of the things the body actually needs, and it will cause us to overconsume and therefore overwhelm the machinery that processes the carbohydrate. So ultra processed carbs are really a never to me. If you're going to eat, I have two exceptions to this in my world, which is 90% dark chocolate, which has 3 grams of added sugar per serving.
Well, the
And
sugar itself isn't not that bad, assuming you don't have other things going. When you have processed foods, the most dangerous food in the processed foods is not sugar; it's the fat.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, it's not. I just the processed. What the real point I'm trying to make is that carbs and processed carbs are two,
Yeah.
I think, somewhat different things. And then the other part I think about it is that you've got carbs, which need to be processed by the, mitochondria to turn into something usable, or it's going to be stored as fat and cause all these problems. But we also have to think about the mitochondria, everything else that's coming at it, that's reducing its capacity to do the processing of the carbohydrate. So a carbohydrate in a body of someone with incredible mitochondrial function is going to be processed differently than someone whose mitochondria is being hit by artificial blue light at night and obesogenic toxic chemicals and low sleep and not enough movement and all those things. Like that's so context matters. So I would not say that I'm a proponent of a low carb diet in the sense that carbs are a problem. I think that it's contextual and I would also say, I think the human body, as I studied it on more of this level, I think there are incredible redundant pathways in the body to get to similar outcomes through different inputs, like if they are healthful inputs. So
sure.
I think that's why it's key to track the biomarkers that can give you a sense of the chronic inflammation, the mitochondrial function, and the oxidative stress, and see if the diet you're on and the macronutrient ratio you're sort of generally doing is leading to the outcome you want, which is really good markers in all those domains. Yeah. So I don't have a one size fits all perspective on carbs.
Can possibly ever disagree with that. That's a perfect answer. I have a point for you to consider, because the conclusion, it's something I've been reflecting on for quite a while, and the conclusion I reached is the primary, a major feature of a result of lack of mitochondrial function. When you don't have enough energy, there's a process that I don't think is widely appreciated, and I'm not sure if you've encountered or reflected on it, but I'm really curious because you've reflected on a lot of things in this area. And that is the ability to eliminate oxygen from your large intestine.
Whoa.
It's an anaerobic environment. Designed to have obligate anaerobes, and you know what that means. These are bugs that if they get a few molecules of oxygen, they are dead. And if you don't have enough cellular energy, you can't excrete the extra oxygen. It becomes partially oxygen toxic, which kills these bugs, creates a room for facultative anaerobes, which they both produce endotoxin, but the facultative anaerobes are far more virulent. And when you have a disruption of the microbiome and you have these facultative anaerobes going around, secreting endotoxin, which is one of the destroyers of mitochondrial function. So it gets to be this endless, progressive downhill spiral, because you got all the toxins you're talking about, but then that influences the gut because there's not enough energy, and it just gets this vicious downhill spiral that you can't get out of until you correct the gut. Yeah.
This is not something I've thought about. This is fascinating. I want to go so deep down this road.
Well, this is where I'm headed. I'm actually
I love that.
Yeah, but because that is sort of the missing piece of the equation, because how can you argue with everything you said? I mean, those are all these toxins, and there's many of them, and the others that we haven't mentioned, but certainly you mentioned all up in the book, seed oils and EMFs and other toxins, and they ultimately, interestingly, they have a similar pathway. If you look at this biochemically, it's a simple pathway. They increase intracellular calcium concentration.
Yeah.
And that calcium increases nitric oxide and superoxide that instantaneously form peroxynitrate. Very powerful reactive nitrogen species. Every single one of these things, including endotoxin, they all do through different receptors, membrane receptors. Endotoxin does it through TL4, but they all decrease that. And then you get this downward spiral, lower mitochondrial function. No mitochondrial energy, it just decreases continuously. And then you do these crazy interventions like low carb diets where you have a high fat diet, just makes it worse and worse.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the sort of the summary why we in this progressively increasing epidemic of chronic disease.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's really it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, this goes without saying, I think, but it's just completely a blind spot in our $4 trillion healthcare system.
Oh yeah.
Like I know people who are listening kind of, I think probably intuit this at this point, but like, this is not remotely what the healthcare system is thinking about. In fact, it antagonizes it. Yeah. And so I think that we're in a very exciting time where people, I think individuals are going to be the catalysts for change because the financial incentives are not changing anytime soon. And so that's pretty cool. It's going to be, I think I think it's going to be probably more bottoms up. Although I'm really excited to see different doctors, you know, coming around.
Yeah. You being one of them.
A foot soldier in this. You guys, there are so many people before me who, like you, who have inspired me, and I feel very grateful.
Well, it's great to inspire people, but people have to listen and make brave and courageous choices like you did. And now we understand why you were able to do that, largely because of your parents. But it still was your choice. You could have chosen different. Some people do. They choose different. But it's just amazing. And just from my experience, your parents were an anomaly. There's not many parents that do that. It's a very tiny minority of parents who are healthy enough themselves, who receive similar training from their parents. So it just gets worse and worse and worse. So ultimately, what you're doing, just so you understand what you're doing, when you help people create more cellular energy, you're connecting them back so that they can get out of this rut and they can create kids that had the experience you did.
Yeah.
And that's what's required. It's an absolute requirement to do this.
Yes.
You have to have cellular energy.
Yes.
Without it, you just fail. 100% you fail.
Well, that's why people say you're so obsessed with metabolism. Why metabolism? And it's like, I am obsessed with metabolism because and this is the core nugget is that, as a machine of 40 trillion plus cells, there's people who talk about hormones and this and it's like all of that's very important, but it's all still higher level than metabolism because you need without power. It's like without gas to a car. It doesn't matter if it's a Ferrari, it's not running. We have to have power to do anything, even make the hormones, transport the hormones, exocytose the hormones. Everything requires energy. So if we don't get that right, we're not going to be healthy. And the reason it's showing up as dozens, if not hundreds of different conditions, I always say it's very simple. We have over 200 cell types in the body. We have all these differentiated cells. I mean, they all come from one cell, which is so cool, but we have all these specialized cells. And underpowering in different cell types will look like different symptoms. That doesn't mean it's a different disease. We're confusing the symptoms for the disease. The disease is inside the cell. The symptom is what it looks like externally when a certain type of cell is dysfunctional. But instead of treating the disease, we're treating the symptoms, of course. And, obviously underpowering in a retinal cell is going to look different than underpowering of an endothelial cell, which is going to look different than underpowering of an ovarian cell, which is going to look different than underpowering of an astrocyte in the brain. So the beauty of all of that is that like the nugget is that it's actually simpler. A lot of the way out is simpler than we've been led to
believe.
believe.
There is only one disease. Mitochondrial dysfunction. That's it. Everything else is a symptom. It's a collection of symptoms that medicine has decided to identify as a disease.
Yes.
That's it. And they have, and the solution is symptomatic band-aids that they make money from. Simple and sweet. That's what it is. But if they addressed mitochondrial function, almost every disease known to man would reverse, unless you took chemo.
Oh, yeah. And
chemo
I guess
is a death sentence. It's a death sentence. Is almost everyone will die from the cancer, from the not from the cancer, but from the chemo. You cannot recover biology if they've taken enough chemo. You just can't. It's a suicide pill.
One of the things I make a point of in the book to differentiate for people is that what I'm talking about is all related to chronic illnesses, not so much acute issues like an infection or a trauma.
But that's still mitochondrial dysfunction.
I was going to say, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I do make a very distinct,
100%. It's your immune system, vitamin D exposure, sun exposure, rest, sleep. It's all related to that. Nothing different.
Yeah.
And stress.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that's still a journey that I'm kind of, unpacking.
Well, I'm excited you're doing this. The field needs people like you. We're desperately in need of you people. And I'm so glad you joined and signed up.
Well, I'm so glad that we're connected now. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch for many years to go. I'm so grateful. Yeah.
You've already enlisted in the fight. So I might be coming to solicit your
Thank you.
We've got a big challenge in front of us. No. The world desperately needs this information, and it's not that hard. It's just simple. We need structures. I'm actually in the process of identifying those tools to share the knowledge, to do this seamlessly, somewhat like Barefoot Doctor, so we can do it inexpensively, because you cannot charge. This current model is we're on an existential course for destruction. If we continue this course, there's no way around it. It will self-destruct. It's a mathematical inevitability. Yeah. I
unfortunately have come to that similar conclusion. And yet I think, similar to you, I am totally optimistic.
Yeah, that was doable, because especially because, my passion is health and technology is part of the solution. Yeah. A big part. Yeah. And I'll share more with you and others in the not too distant future, because I've got some big surprises coming to the world.
It's awesome.
So anyway, the book is Good Energy, on sale at your favorite bookstore. Casey is an absolute delight. She's a gift from God to help us learn more about the fundamental philosophical approaches you need to help you make the choices that are going to bring more joy and vitality in your life, and it can back to spirit. That's what's required. And increasing cellular energy is a fundamental precept of that. Couldn't be any more important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, hit the like and subscribe button so you can get more videos that can help you and your family take control of your health.